Americans built cars for themselves. They didn't do much export. They were brilliant at knocking out a lot of cars. They're masters of mass production. In the case of the Corvette C2, in the first production year alone, they built 20,000 examples of that car, and it was almost half roadster, half coupe. From that, because they sold cars to themselves, it wasn't as if they had to compete on paper or even in the showrooms with the Europeans necessarily.
Yeah, I don't think they even thought about the rest of the world when they were building their own cars.
Yeah. GM said, right, let's create a new car and a new division to build it. Let's call it Corvette, and let's really go into the sports car market.
Yeah.
Up until 1955, they were doing it with a dull 6-cylinder engine that was known as the Blue Flame. And then Chevrolet basically had Ed Cole from Cadillac come on board, which was a massively significant thing because Cole penned what became one of the really famous engines, which is the small block Chev V8, which is the engine that powers the car that we drove. And the thing is that those two things together, a little bit of left field thinking with a bit of influence of sports cars from Europe with a good, simple, reliable horsepower engine like the 327 small block. On paper at the very least, it combines into a car that should be really good fun. It's a car which has always really interested me from a distance because there are some really interesting personalities that were around the thing when it was new, some of which were, European in their influence. The guy that the Americans, rightly or wrongly, call the father of the Corvette was a Belgian-born guy called Zora Arkus Duntov, and he'd done time racing cars in Europe and had, as an engineer, obviously derived some ideas about how sports cars should be underneath.
You're talking about the independent rear suspension. That's getting unsprung weight down. It's reducing the unsprung weight, which is a racing thing. Like a few of these guys, these designers, had raced themselves, and that makes a very big difference to the way you think about how you're going to build a car. The fact that this car has over 50% of its weight over the rear axle, as opposed to most front engine sports cars, which have the majority of their weight over the front axle. So that gives it a much better handling potential. It's still a pretty heavy car.
It's a heavy car.
In the scheme of things, as a race car even, but it's giving it the opportunity to be able to do those things.
The average American who plausibly was thinking about buying a Corvette, what were the other cars they were looking at? There are probably no other American cars in the pool. They were probably contemplating spending a little bit more on an E-Type or vastly more on something else, but it would have come from Europe.
I don't think there wasn't really an American sports car before the Corvette, was there? The Corvette is the first American sports car that you think of.
You imagine those 60s boardrooms that were full of executives, and they were looking at the numbers, what it cost, what these things were going to cost, how much they're going to be able to sell it for, what it was going to cost to get it there. In the case of GM, I think the corporation strangled the departments that were full of the engineers.
That's the age-old thing, isn't it, with American cars? It's the cost. Maybe not, the build quality is not quite there, but it's a cheaper car and they're a consumer society, so that in 2 or 3 years down the line, they're probably going to buy another one anyway. So what does it matter if a few bits fall off or the fiberglass cracks? Who cares? Let's just buy a new one. Matters to me, but maybe not so many of the consumers that were buying these cars. They're selling the dream. Right?
They were.
All of the stuff with American cars is that they're selling the dream. They're selling the lifestyle. They're selling what you want to see yourself in driving down the road.